Let's talk about one of the longest running conflicts in the world. It's happening in the Democratic Republic of Congo, which is here. People also call it the DRC, or sometimes just Congo. But don't confuse it with the Republic of Congo, which is another country next door. The DRC is huge, but we're going to focus on the east of the country, where fighting has been going on for almost 3 decades, involving dozens of armed groups. Neighboring countries like Uganda, Rwanda, and Burundi have got involved too. So it's always been super complicated, never as clear-cut as one side versus another. But one rivalry that's played out this whole time has been between Congo and Rwanda, and that's a big part of what's happening now. At the start of 2025, a powerful rebel group called the M23 took over the cities of Goma and Bukavu, the capitals of North and South Kivu provinces. But the UN and others say the M23 is getting all kinds of support from Rwanda, and that Rwanda has about 3,000 to 4,000 troops on the ground in eastern DRC. Officially, Rwanda denies any involvement.
Rwanda currently have any troops at all in eastern DRC?
I don't know.
You're the commander-in-chief.
Yeah, there are many things I don't know.
The M23 did not come back on its own. It came back because Rwanda backed it.
It's part of an ongoing tension and conflict between Congo and Rwanda for 30 years now.
It all goes back to the 90s, or 1994 to be precise. That's when the genocide in Rwanda happened. In just 100 days, extremists from the majority ethnic group in Rwanda, the Hutus, killed around 800,000 people. Most of them were Tutsis, a minority ethnic group. The genocide ended when a Tutsi-led rebel group took control of the capital Kigali and seized power. And by the way, one of the leaders of that group was Paul Kagame, who's the current president of Rwanda and has been since the year 2000. Now, during and after the genocide, hundreds of thousands of Hutus fled over the border to refugee camps in DRC. But among them were some of the extremists who took part in the killings.
They then started to remobilize and carried with them the anti-Tutsi ideology that had stimulated the genocide in Rwanda, and therefore Kigali saw them as enemies.
2 years after the genocide, Rwanda invaded DRC to go after these Hutu militia groups. And that kicked off what's known as the First Congo War. Other countries, including Uganda and Burundi, joined the fight. They all went after Congo's president, who'd been in power for more than 30 years, kicked him out, and installed a new government. But they soon fell out with that new government, and that triggered another, even bigger war. The war ended with a peace deal. It included elections and a process to integrate various rebel groups into the Congolese army. But that deal never really brought peace, particularly in eastern Congo.
It's what some analysts called a no peace, no war situation. There's a proliferation of armed groups. The army has remained fragmented and also very abusive and criminalized. And then internationally, although the Rwandan and Ugandan governments, who were heavily involved, of course, in the civil war, have formally agreed to pull out their troops from eastern DRC in the early 2000s, they never really agreed to reduce their influence.
20 years later, eastern Congo is still being fought over. One of the main features of the conflict has been a series of rebellions by Congolese Tutsi groups, often backed by Rwanda. These groups have evolved over time, but the M23 is the latest iteration and has become the most powerful. It emerged in 2012 and got its name from a peace deal that had been signed 3 years earlier, a deal the M23 says the Congolese government never fully implemented. The M23 actually managed to capture Goma back in 2012, but were forced to withdraw after just 10 days. And for a few years after that, the M23 were essentially out of the picture, but they came back in 2021. And have been gaining more and more territory since then.
Kigali-backed M23 rebels ramped up their lightning offensive in the east of DR Congo.
The way they've captured, and this time held on to Goma and Bukavu, the region's main cities, shows just how powerful they've become.
Calm has returned to Bukavu and people are getting back their daily lives.
Rwandan-backed M23 rebels are now aiming for the city of Uvira.
Uvira would be the third major city in M23's advance in eastern DRC in a matter of weeks.
It's estimated that M23 has 6,000 fighters, but a lot of people say they couldn't have taken all this territory without Rwanda's help.
The M23 itself, from what we understand, is really dominated by the Rwandan army. For key battles, it's the Rwandan army that brings the firepower, that brings the coherence, the discipline, the organization, the resources with it. The M23 didn't have any of that. If it hadn't been for the Rwandan army, we wouldn't be here today.
If also you see the number of Rwandan military who are fighting alongside M23, one will wonder if it is the M23 is backed by Rwanda, or if Rwanda is intervening, just accompanied by M23.
Now, what do the M23 and Rwanda want in Eastern Congo? Well, there's a lot going on here. There's what the different sides are saying, and also what experts are piecing together based on what's actually happening. So for example, the M23 and Rwanda say they want to protect Tutsis who face discrimination and persecution in Congo for a long time. But that doesn't necessarily explain everything they're doing or have done.
There is a history of persecution and discrimination against the Congolese Tutsi community in the Eastern Congo. It's very important to say that. And yet, there wasn't an increase in that discrimination and persecution in the days leading up to the M23 rebellion. It's not like they responded to an imminent threat.
The M23 and Rwanda also say they're going after Hutu extremists. These are the groups we mentioned earlier that Rwanda first went after back in the 90s. There's one group in particular which comes up. It's called the FDLR, and Rwanda still sees it as a security threat.
The FDLR question has to be answered. We have to find a solution.
That is something Rwanda has been always bringing up, even when, according to the UN report, according to many actors in the region, according to Rwandan officials themselves, the threat to Rwanda that represented FDLR has changed completely over years.
The genocide has such a foundational role in Rwandan society that it's impossible to actually disentangle genuine security concern from manipulation and pretext.
Another reason people talk about is natural resources, because this region has a lot of really valuable minerals that have always helped to fuel and fund the conflict there. It's minerals like gold, cobalt, and coltan, which is used to make all kinds of electronic devices. A recent report by UN experts said that the M23 had taken control of a mining area called Rubaya in 2024. It's got one of the biggest coltan mines in the region, which was earning the M23 around $800,000 a month last year. It said minerals were being exported via Rwanda.
Last year, about $1.1 billion of minerals were exported from Rwanda. That's a huge amount for such a small economy. And most of those minerals came from the Eastern Congo.
Now, another question is whether the M23's ambitions may have grown, particularly off the back of all their recent military success. Because the M23 is also part of an alliance that seems to have political aims that go well beyond Eastern Congo. It's called the AFC, the acronym of its French name, which translates as Congo River Alliance. And the AFC is led by this guy, Corneille Nangaa, who's not Tutsi. He's the former head of Congo's Electoral Commission, but has become one of the main opponents of the president, Félix Tshisekedi. Nangaa says he wants the M23 to take the fight all the way to the capital and take control of the whole country.
Our objective is Congo. We are fighting for Congo. We are not fighting for mineral. Tshisekedi regime has destroyed the army, has destroyed the national police. He has destroyed the administration, and above all, he has destroyed justice.
Now, President Tshisekedi says Congo's army is ready to defend every inch of territory, and his government has designated the M23 as a terrorist group.
Une riposte vigoureuse et coordonnée contre ces terroristes et leurs parrains est en cours.
But we're not really seeing signs of that on the ground. There are reports of Congolese soldiers surrendering and even fleeing to Rwanda. And Congo's army and government are notoriously weak.
The Congolese army is a real mess, and it has been historically. It's been riven with factions that come from armed groups that have refused to be dissolved into the army, so they retain parallel command structures. It's also an army that's extremely corrupt, and all issues of pay and resources are the subject of very severe infighting amongst senior military.
Contrast that with the M23 in Rwanda, who've been rapidly taking and holding territory and setting up parallel administrations in those areas.
Everywhere it goes, it's destroying administrative records, issuing birth certificates, setting up tax collection services and revenue services. It very much feels like this is a long-term occupation.
So what about attempts to resolve this situation? Well, there have been a couple of regional peace initiatives going on, but neither have made much progress. Meanwhile, Congo's president has called for countries to blacklist Rwanda. The US has put sanctions on a Rwandan minister, and the UK has announced some measures, including pausing financial aid to Rwanda. The EU is talking about suspending their mineral trade, but have held off on sanctions for now.
Since 2012, Rwanda has made itself very useful to a number of Western countries with whom it has a whole range of different ties, whether it's sponsoring football teams or, most importantly, Rwanda's peacekeeping operations in Central African Republic, and I think notably in Mozambique, where the Rwandan army is protecting a very important installation of the Total oil company. And I think these create a set of relationships with Western politicians, which means that Western politicians are very reluctant to challenge Kigali.
Ultimately, unless you force these leaders, bring them to the table via means of international sanctions, international boycotts, close the money tap, we're not going to see this conflict ending unless you have some serious pressure being placed on the groups.
And while this cycle of conflict goes on, driven by all sorts of motivations and competing interests, it is, unsurprisingly, civilians who are bearing the biggest cost. Thousands of people have been killed in the recent fighting, and hundreds of thousands have been displaced. Almost 1 million people were already living in camps around Goma. They'd fled there to escape other rounds of fighting over the years. But some of those camps have been attacked and destroyed, and the M23 have also ordered thousands of people to leave these camps.
It's a critical issue here because you've got some of the most needy people on the face of this earth, really. People that have been displaced for 2 years, 3 years, and even more, now having to return back to their home villages.
Sisi hatuna maisha, kwenye tunaenda hatuwe kama tunaenda wapi, nyumba zishalunguziwa, walishabomola.
Hivi kulipa, tuko nauzisha saa vile kabashe, nayo ni yenyewe tulikuwa na logotesha tu. Hapa hatuna na kitu. Tuko narudia na kwetu tuko narudia hatuna hako kitu hatukulimaka.
For decades, the conflict in eastern DRC has also been characterized by some of the worst atrocities imaginable. Some of the commanders have actually been found guilty of war crimes at the International Criminal Court in The Hague. And this pattern of violence is still playing out. Human Rights Watch says that in recent fighting, both sides have killed and raped camp residents, interfered with aid delivery, and committed other abuses. UNICEF says children are also being targeted with rape, and at levels surpassing anything they've seen in recent years. The UN has accused the M23 of executing children.
I honestly don't think we've heard the extent of the humanitarian crisis unfolding.
Sexual and gender-based violence directed at children, at women, has really left scars that will continue on in individual community lives for years to come.
At the end of the day, it's 30 years of suffering for millions of Congolese people who do not have anything to do with the interests of one or another and who only want to live in a peaceful country.
At Start Here, we cover topics that come up in the news. Check out this video we made that explains international law and the ICC, and follow me on Instagram so you can stay up to date with all the stories we're working on.